Greyson Ashford waited for the bus at 11:47 p.m., her fingers buried deep inside her coat sleeves, her boots soaked through from the slush lining the curb, when a man in a charcoal wool coat stepped up beside her and said, "Cold night for the bus, huh?" She glanced sideways, not expecting anyone else to be waiting this late, especially not a man who looked like he belonged in front of a fireplace in a penthouse, not at a grimy stop outside a 24-hour diner. "You think?" she muttered, breath fogging in the air. He smiled, not the smarmy kind, but patient, polite, like he wasn't in a rush. "Didn't mean to bother you." "You didn't?" she said, then sighed, hugging her arms tighter. "Just sick of missing the last train and then standing out here like an idiot." "You're not an idiot," he said easily. "You're just someone trying to get home." She blinked, caught off guard by how kind that sounded. No one talked like that in this city anymore. Not to strangers. Not at midnight. His voice was warm, but his face looked like it belonged on some glossy magazine's strong jaw. Dark hair dusted with snow, a thread of silver at his temples like he'd earned it instead of aged into it. He didn't look old, maybe mid-30s, tops, but he had that calm, steady energy of someone who didn't panic when things went wrong. She looked away, focusing on the empty street instead. "You always wait for the bus this late?" "My driver's sick," he said lightly. "Thought I'd give public transportation a try." She gave him a suspicious glance. "You have a driver?" He nodded like it wasn't a big deal. "Usually." "Right," she said. "And I usually take my private jet to work, but it's in the shop." He laughed, a real one this time. "Fair." That sounded worse out loud than it did in my head. She smiled despite herself. "Greyson," she said, offering her name without thinking. "Brenner," he said, shaking her gloved hand. His grip was warm even through the fabric. "Nice to meet you." They stood in silence for a moment, the wind picking up, the snow starting to fall again in soft flurries. "I work at the diner across the street," she said, nodding toward the neon sign behind them. "Double shift." "I smell like grease and burnt coffee." "I own a company that builds hospitals," he said, like he was talking about something as simple as delivering mail. She blinked. "Wait, you're serious?" He nodded once. "Like, hospitals?" "Yes." She stared at him. "And you're taking the bus because your driver's sick?" He shrugged. "Didn't want to Uber. Thought it might be nice to see how people actually get around." She didn't know whether to laugh or roll her eyes. "You're either the nicest rich guy I've ever met or the weirdest." "Can I be both?" he asked, smiling. She let out a small laugh. "You're definitely something." The bus pulled up with a hiss of brakes, and Greyson stepped forward, but then Brenner touched her arm lightly. "Hey, do you want a ride?" She turned, eyebrows raised. "You just said your driver's sick." "I meant I'll call a car." "For you. You've been on your feet all night. You shouldn't have to wait another 40 minutes at the transfer station." She shook her head. "I'm not taking a car from a stranger." "I get that," he said calmly. "But maybe I'm not a stranger anymore." She narrowed her eyes. "Still not taking a car." He smiled again, and this time it wasn't just polite, it was something gentler. "Fair enough. Then I'll wait with you." "That's not necessary." "I know," he said. "But I want to." And for some reason, she let him. They sat side by side on the back of the bus, her coat still damp, his posture relaxed. They talked the whole ride about nothing and everything. About how she wanted to be a nurse but hadn't figured out the college part yet. About how he hated being in boardrooms but loved designing spaces that actually helped people. About how sometimes, late at night, it felt like the city belonged only to people who didn't fit in anywhere else. He got off 2 stops before her. "Good night, Greyson," he said when he stood up, holding onto the rail. "I hope I see you again." She didn't say anything until the doors closed behind him. She didn't think she would see him again. She was wrong. The next night, he walked into the diner. Greyson was wiping down a table when she heard the bell over the door and looked up to see Brenner, this time in a navy coat. No snow in his hair, but still that calm expression. He walked straight to the counter like he belonged there. "You followed me," she said, stunned. "I didn't," he said, sliding onto a stool. "I asked the driver which diner you worked at. I figured there was a 50-50 chance it was this one." "Why?" "I wanted to see you again." She stared at him, heart thudding in her chest. "You're serious?" "I tend to be." She folded her arms. "You do know I'm not going to fall into your lap just because you're rich and polite, right?" "I'm not asking you to," he said, voice soft. "I just want to get to know you." "If that's okay." Greyson didn't know what to say to that, so she poured him coffee. The next week, he came in every night. Sometimes he stayed for hours. nursing a cup of coffee until her shift ended. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they didn't. But he was always there. And slowly, she let her guard down. He never bragged. Never made her feel small. He asked questions and actually listened. He remembered everything, like how she liked her eggs scrambled and how she hated the sound of clinking ice. He never pushed. Until one night he said, "Come to dinner with me." She laughed. "You mean like real dinner? Not eggs and toast at midnight." "I mean real dinner," he said. "Dress up. Let me take you somewhere nice. I don't have anything fancy. I'll take care of that." She hesitated. "I don't want you to buy me anything." "I won't," he said. "I'll lend it. You can give it back after." She stared at him. "You're really something, you know that?" His smile was quiet. "I know." 2 nights later, a sleek black car pulled up outside her apartment building. A box waited inside it. A midnight blue dress, simple but elegant, and a note. "Just for tonight. No pressure. I just want your company. B." She almost didn't go. But something in her chest told her if she didn't, she'd regret it. So she slipped on the dress, told herself not to fall for him, and stepped into the car. The restaurant was on the top floor of a skyscraper. The kind of place where the walls were glass and the city lights looked like stars. The waiter knew Brenner by name. There were no menus, just courses that kept arriving, each more beautiful than the last. Greyson had never experienced anything like it. "Why me?" she asked halfway through dinner, setting down her glass. He looked at her, his expression serious. "Because you're real. You're kind. You're smart. And because I think about you even when I'm not trying to." Her heart stuttered. "Greyson," he said quietly, "I know this is fast. I know I'm not your world. But I want to be. If you'll let me." She swallowed hard, her voice barely a whisper. "You already are." And something shifted between them, something deep, something unstoppable. Neither of them knew it yet. But that night would change everything. Greyson had never been in a place where the floor didn't creak beneath her feet. But Brenner's penthouse didn't make a sound. The walls stretched high and smooth, the windows endless, and the city below looked like it belonged to someone else entirely. She stood just inside the entryway, still in the dress from dinner, her fingers twitching at her sides. "Are you sure you want me here?" she said, her voice low. Brenner loosened the collar of his shirt as he walked toward her. His jacket already tossed on a leather chair that probably cost more than her rent for a year. "I didn't bring you here by accident." She nodded slowly, her eyes scanning the room, the fireplace flickering in the distance, the grand piano near the far wall, the single glass of wine already waiting for her on the marble counter. "I've never known anyone who lives like this," she said, not accusing, just honest. "I've never known anyone who makes me forget I do," he said, stopping a few feet away. Something caught in her chest, but she pushed it down. "You don't have to say things like that." "I'm not trying to impress you," he said. "I'm trying to be honest." She stepped out of her shoes, the heels clicking against the flooring as she moved further inside, cautious like the place might vanish if she walked too fast. "This place doesn't feel real." "It doesn't always feel real to me either," he said. "But you do." She turned to face him then, the city lighting her from behind through the 30-foot glass. "You don't know everything about me." "I want to," he said without hesitation. She took a breath, steadying herself. "I used to sneak into the library just to use the heater during the winter. I read medical books because they were the thickest and took the longest to finish. I sleep with music playing because silence makes me feel like I'm about to disappear." Brenner didn't flinch. "What kind of music?" "Old jazz," she said. "I'll remember that." Greyson's voice dropped. "I don't want to be a project to you." His tone was gentle but firm. "You're not. You're the first person who's seen past everything I've built and still looked me in the eye." She looked away, unable to hold his gaze. "You're not what I expected. Neither are you." She crossed her arms. "What if I don't belong in your world?" He took a step closer. "Then I'll meet you in yours." Greyson stood still, her heart pounding for reasons she didn't entirely understand. "Why do I feel like everything in my life just tipped sideways?" "Because maybe for the first time it's finally going forward." She didn't answer, but she didn't leave either. Brenner didn't touch her. He didn't move closer than she allowed. He just stood there, steady as ever, like he'd wait as long as it took. That night she didn't stay. She left with her coat zipped to her throat and the dress folded neatly in a garment bag he'd already had ready in the car. He didn't try to stop her. But the next day, a man delivered a record player to her apartment. No note, just a single vinyl inside the sleeve. Ella Fitzgerald, soft and slow. She didn't call him, but she listened to it. Every night. 2 weeks passed. He didn't show up at the diner. No late-night coffee. No waiting at the counter. It was as if he'd stepped back completely, like he respected the space she hadn't asked for but clearly needed. It made her stomach twist. Then one morning she walked into the diner and found her manager pacing by the payphone. "Ashford," he said, tossing her an envelope. "This came for you." She caught it, flipping it over. Her name was written in clean, dark ink across the front. Inside, a handwritten note. "I'm speaking at a fundraiser tonight at the Wexley. It's about building a new trauma center in the Bronx. I'll be there if you're curious to hear what I actually do all day. Brenner." She stared at the card for a long time. That evening she took the subway uptown. She borrowed a dress from a friend who owed her a favor, pinned her hair back as best she could, and walked into the Wexley like she belonged, heels clicking across marble, clutch clenched in her hand. The ballroom was lit like something out of a fantasy. Every table glowed with candles, crystal glasses lined the countertops, and the crowd moved with the kind of ease that was born from old money and deeper secrets. She stayed near the back, unnoticed, until he stepped onto the stage. Brenner wore a black tuxedo, tailored and clean, but his voice was the same, steady, calm, real. "We're not just building walls and windows," he said. "We're building hope. We're creating places where someone's worst day has a chance to turn into their best outcome. And if we don't do that here, if we don't do that in every corner of the city, then what's the point of having money at all?" The room erupted into applause. But Brenner's eyes found her before he stepped down. After the speeches, she turned to leave, to vanish before he could reach her, but his hand caught her arm gently near the exit. "I didn't think you'd come," he said, his voice lower now. "I didn't think I would either. Why did you?" "I wanted to see if what you said back at the diner was true." "And?" "You mean it," she said quietly. "Every word." "I do." She looked up at him. "You're not just rich. You're dangerous." He raised a brow. "Dangerous? Because you make people want things they swore they'd stopped believing in." He stepped closer. "Then let me be dangerous. Just for you." She didn't answer, but this time when he offered his hand, she took it. They didn't go back to the penthouse. They walked instead through the cold, through the quiet streets, past the places where people still waited for buses and counted change for food. And when she looked at him, she realized something terrifying. She was starting to trust him. Not because of what he had, but because of who he was when no one was watching. The next few days blurred together. He showed her the trauma center under construction. Let her walk through the half-finished halls, explaining how every corner was designed to move patients faster, to save more lives. She asked questions. Real ones. And he didn't talk down to her. When she mentioned that she'd been trying to apply for nursing school but didn't have the application fee, he didn't offer to pay it. He just asked where she wanted to go. And the next morning, an admissions counselor from St. Margaret's called her directly and said someone had pulled strings to get her an interview for their spring program. She stared at the phone for a full minute before whispering, "You didn't," he said. "I just made a call. The rest is on you." She got in. And for the first time in years, Greyson felt like the world had finally cracked open, just enough to let her breathe. But happiness made her nervous. Because every time something good happened, something worse had always followed. And this time she was falling. Fast. Greyson didn't expect the gala invitation. It came in a black envelope, hand-delivered to the diner during the lunch rush. Heather, the day hostess, handed it over with a teasing raise of her brow, but Greyson barely noticed. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened it, revealing the thick card inside. Gold-foiled font announced a benefit held by the Ashford Foundation, Brenner's family's philanthropic arm, at the Langford Hotel, one of the most exclusive venues in the city. She read it twice, then tucked it into her apron and went back to pouring coffee like it hadn't just shifted the ground beneath her feet. That night, she didn't go home. She walked to the river instead, staring out at the dark water as wind tangled through her coat. The truth was settling around her, heavy and undeniable. Brenner wasn't just wealthy. He was legacy-rich. There were buildings named after his family. Hospitals, scholarships, institutions. She hadn't realized how deep it went, how far he'd come from the quiet man who waited for the bus beside her. When she finally let herself into her apartment, the lights were off. But the record player on the shelf blinked softly, waiting. She put on the vinyl he'd sent her, lay on the couch, and let the music play until morning. 2 nights later, she stood in front of the Langford in a dress borrowed from one of her classmates at St. Margaret's. It was simple, black, modest enough to not draw attention but tailored enough to not look out of place. Her hair was pinned in a way she'd never tried before, her makeup careful but not too much. She walked through the revolving glass doors, keeping her chin up, her steps even. The ballroom gleamed with crystal chandeliers and candlelight. Waiters in white gloves moved like clockwork through the crowd. Guests floated from table to table, clinking glasses, their laughter smooth and practiced. Brenner stood near the raised dais, surrounded by donors and board members, but the moment his eyes found hers, he excused himself and crossed the room without hesitation. "You came," he said, quietly enough for just her. "I wasn't sure I should." His gaze searched her face. "I wouldn't have sent the invitation if I didn't want you here. I'm not exactly foundation material. You're exactly why it exists." She looked away, unsettled by how easily he could say things that shook her so deeply. "I don't know how to be part of this world." "You don't have to be," he said. "You just have to be here. With me. I'm not sure that's enough for everyone watching. I don't care about them. You should." He stepped closer. "Why?" "Because you're Brenner Ashford. You run things. She stopped herself. "What?" "You're not allowed to fall for someone like me." "I already have." She stared at him, the chandelier light catching the edge of his jaw. "You're not scared." "I'm terrified," he said. "But I'm more scared of not having you in my life." Before she could respond, a woman approached. Elegant, with silver hair swept into a knot and a gown that looked like it had never touched a hanger. "Brenner," she said, kissing his cheek. "You're neglecting your guests." "Mother," he said evenly. "This is Greyson Ashford." Greyson froze. The woman's expression didn't flicker. "Another Ashford?" she said lightly. "How quaint." "She's not family," Brenner said. "Not yet." Grayson's breath caught. His mother blinked once, coolly, then turned to her. "Well, enjoy the evening, dear." She glided away without another word. Greyson exhaled slowly. "That went well. She's never liked anyone I've dated." "You're already ahead." They didn't speak for a while after that. Not until the speeches began and Brenner was called to the stage. She watched him move with quiet authority, thanking donors, speaking about expanding emergency care access for underserved communities. But there was a flicker of something else in his eyes. Something directed only at her. After the applause and mingling resumed, he came back to her side. "I need to show you something," he said. He led her out of the ballroom, through a hallway lined with framed photographs of past galas, and into a private suite. It was quiet here. Removed. The city lights poured in through a bank of windows, casting shadows across the polished floor. He walked to a side table and picked up a leather folder. "This is the project I haven't told anyone about yet," he said, offering it to her. "It's not public. Not even the board knows." She opened it slowly, scanning the diagrams and renderings. Clinic. Small. Mobile. Designed for neighborhoods without hospitals. "You were right," he said. "About the people who fall through the cracks. I started this because of you." She closed the folder. "Brenner, I'm not trying to impress you. I know. I'm trying to build a life that makes sense with you in it." Her voice wavered. "I don't know how to do this. Then we'll figure it out together." She looked up at him, unsure, overwhelmed. He reached for her hand, his touch warm and steady. "I'm not offering you a fairy tale," he said. "I'm offering you something real. Messy. Complicated. But real." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped closer, pressing her forehead lightly to his chest. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her like the world had narrowed down to just this moment. "I want real," she whispered. He pulled back just enough to look at her. "Then you'll have it." They didn't go back to the party. They stayed in the suite, talking for hours. Not about money, not about expectations, but about the things that terrified them, the things that made them feel alive, the things they still hoped for. He told her about his brother, the one he lost in a car accident when they were teenagers. How it changed everything, how the hospital they'd rushed him to was too far, too late. She told him about her father, the way he disappeared the year she turned 12, and how some nights she still dreamed he'd come back. He didn't try to fix it. He just listened. And when the sun started to rise over the skyline, casting soft gold light through the windows, she realized she hadn't felt this safe in years. But it didn't last. Later that week, she was leaving the clinic at her volunteer shift when she saw the article. A glossy tabloid magazine with a headline that hit like a punch to the ribs. Ashford airs new girl. Waitress or wife in training. There was a photo. Her. Walking next to Brenner outside the Langford. Laughing at something he'd said. The words beneath it were worse. Phrases like social climber and gold digger thrown around like confetti. Anonymous quotes from close sources questioning her past. Her intentions. She stood on the sidewalk, the magazine trembling in her hand. By the time she reached her apartment, there were 2 more reporters on the sidewalk and a neighbor who wouldn't meet her eyes. She didn't answer Brenner's call. She didn't answer the next 5 either. Not because she didn't trust him, but because she didn't trust herself. Because maybe they were right. Maybe she had no place in his world after all. Greyson didn't cry. Not when she locked the door behind her. Not when she turned off her phone. Not even when she saw the article again, this time on the screen at the corner deli while she walked past with her head down and her hood up. But days passed and Brenner didn't come. No knocking. No calls from strange numbers. No messages slipped under her door. He had given her space, just like he always said he would. And somehow that hurt more than anything else. She sat at the edge of her bed, the record player silent on the shelf, the room too still. Her textbooks lay unopened on the floor. Her notes for her upcoming interview at the clinic sat untouched on her desk. She'd built a version of herself that was starting to believe in possibility, in hope, and one headline had shattered it like glass. And yet she couldn't stop thinking about his eyes the last time he looked at her. Not asking for anything. Just waiting. Just hoping she'd meet him halfway. But she hadn't. She'd run. On the 4th night, she went to the diner. It was past closing. She still had a key. She stepped behind the counter, made herself a cup of coffee, and sat in the corner booth where Brenner always sat. She didn't sip the coffee. She just sat there, until the bell above the door rang. She stiffened, then turned. He stood in the doorway, his coat unbuttoned, his collar damp from the rain outside. "I didn't call," she said before he could speak. "I know. I shouldn't be here. But you are," he said simply. She looked down at the chipped tabletop. "You saw it." "I did. I didn't know they were following us." "I did," he said. "I just didn't think they'd find you interesting enough to write about." Her laugh was dry. "Guess they were bored." He took a step forward. "You disappeared." I panicked. "Why?" "Because I've never had anything this good," she said, her voice cracking on the last word. "And I didn't know how to protect it." Brenner sat across from her, his hands folded on the table. "You don't have to protect it from me. I didn't want to ruin you. You didn't. I'm still afraid." "I'm not," he said. "Not of them. Not of this." She looked up slowly. "Why not?" "Because I know who you are," he said. "And they don't." She stared at him across the dim light of the diner. "I don't think I know who I am when I'm with you. You're everything I've been missing," he said. "Everything I didn't know I needed. I don't want to be your escape." "You're not," he said. "You're my anchor." She gripped the edge of the table. "I don't want to be something you hold on to just because everything else is spinning." "You're not something I'm holding on to," he said. "You're the reason I've stopped spinning." She exhaled shakily, the ache in her chest finally loosening. "You always know what to say," she whispered. "No," he said. "I just know how I feel." He reached into his coat, pulled out a folded slip of paper, and set it gently on the table between them. She unfolded it. It was a document, signed, dated. "I transferred ownership," he said, "of the mobile clinic program. It's under your name now. You'll run it, staff it, grow it. I'll be the donor. Nothing more." Her hands shook. "Why would you do that?" "Because you're the one who should build it. You saw what I didn't. You know what people need. And because if I lost you, I still wanted this piece of you to exist in the world." Tears welled in her eyes then, unbidden and hot. "You can't keep doing things like this." "Why not?" "Because it makes it impossible not to love you," she said. He smiled, but there was something raw in it now. "I never asked you not to." She stood, walked around the booth, and sat beside him. "I don't care what they write," she said. "I don't care what your mother thinks, or what anyone else thinks. But I need to know that you're not doing this to fix me. I'm doing this, he said, because I love you. She looked up at him, her eyes wide, her heart thudding like it had been waiting for those words since the beginning. I love you, he repeated. And not because you're different from everything I've known, but because you make everything I've known feel worth unlearning. She leaned into him, her head on his shoulder. I don't know how to make this work, she said softly. Then we'll make it up as we go. They sat like that for a long time, the hum of the old refrigerator the only sound in the room. Eventually, he reached for her hand. Come with me, he said. To where? To the place I go when I need to remember who I am. She didn't ask questions. She just nodded. They left the diner, walked through the quiet streets in the rain, and got in his car. They drove for 2 hours, out of the city, into the hills, until they reached a quiet clearing surrounded by trees, where an old stone house stood at the edge of a lake. This was my brother's favorite place, Brenner said. We came here every summer. She stepped out of the car, the damp grass brushing her ankles, the smell of pine and wet earth in the air. He walked beside her to the dock at the water's edge. I come here when I forget what matters, he said. When the noise gets too loud. She stood still, watching the fog drift across the surface of the lake. You brought me here, she whispered. Because you matter. She turned to him. I want to try, she said. For real this time. He stepped closer, the rain softening to a mist. I want to build a life with you that's ours, she said. Not the one the magazines write about. Not the one your world expects. Just ours. He cupped her face gently. Then let's do it. She kissed him. Not because it felt like a fairy tale, but because it felt like home. Months passed. The mobile clinics rolled out across the city, serving neighborhoods that had been forgotten for too long. Greyson stood at the front of the very first one, clipboard in hand, while nurses buzzed around her. She wore scrubs now, a name badge clipped to her chest, her hair tied back. Her badge read, Clinical Director. Brenner stood a few feet away, sunglasses on, arms crossed, watching her with quiet pride. They didn't live in his penthouse. They found a place together. A brownstone with creaky floors and a crooked mailbox. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. And on a crisp morning in October, as she stepped out to grab coffee before the clinic opened, she paused at the corner bus stop, the same one where it all started. There was a man there now, tired, cold, waiting. She looked at him for a second, and then she handed him her coffee. Here, she said. You need it more. He blinked, surprised. You sure? She smiled. Yeah, she said. I've already got everything I need. And then she walked away, back to the life she never saw coming. Back to the man who had loved her before he even knew her last name. Back to the world they'd built together. Not a fairy tale, but something better, something real. The autumn air was sharper in the mornings now, and Greyson stood at the window of the brownstone's small kitchen, holding a cup of tea against her palm while the street outside stirred to life. Across the sink, the window pane fogged slightly from the warmth inside. She watched a boy chase a yellow leaf down the sidewalk before his mother caught up and steered him back toward their building. From the hallway, Brenner's voice reached her low, steady, and half-laughing as he spoke on a call. He was pacing as he always did when talking business, but unlike the early days, there was no edge to his tone. He had stopped letting the world pull him in every direction. He had learned how to choose what mattered, and he chose her. She turned back to the stove, stirring the oatmeal before it bubbled over. A few minutes later, he stepped into the kitchen, barefoot, shirt sleeves rolled to the elbows. Sorry, he said, reaching for the coffee pot. That call went longer than expected. They want to fast-track the expansion in Queens. I told them to wait until the pilot data comes in. She slid a bowl across the counter. You're good at saying no now. I had a good teacher, he said, and kissed her temple before sitting beside her at the narrow kitchen island. They ate in easy silence, the kind that came from knowing exactly where the other person was in the room, in life, in heart. It had taken time to reach this rhythm. Time and 1,000 quiet choices. Later that afternoon, Greyson stood in front of a folding table beneath a striped canopy, clipboard in hand, as a line of patients waited patiently at the mobile clinic. The van was parked beside a community center in the Lower East Side, and the team worked like clockwork, nurses checking vitals, volunteers handing out health kits. A young Dr. Greyson had interviewed herself explaining a new asthma treatment to an elderly woman in Spanish. A local reporter hovered nearby, asking permission to write about the clinic for a city paper's weekend feature. Greyson agreed, but only if the focus stayed on the patients. "I'm not the story," she said. "The work is." After the crowd thinned and the last appointment was logged, she leaned against the clinic van and pulled her scarf tighter. The sun was dipping low, and the wind smelled faintly of roasted nuts and warm pretzels from a vendor up the block. Brenner pulled up in a dark sedan, not the kind with tinted windows and a waiting chauffeur, but a modest electric car he'd insisted on buying himself. He stepped out, his coat collar turned up against the wind. "How'd it go today?" he asked, slipping his hand into hers. "3 new patients scheduled for follow-ups," she said. "I think we're starting to build trust here." His eyes softened. "That's you. You make people feel safe." She glanced at him, then looked away quickly. "Sometimes it still feels too big. Like I blink and everything's different again." He leaned against the van beside her. "You've never been small, Greyson. You just finally got the room to grow." She looked up at him. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his coat pocket. She straightened, heart doing something strange in her chest. But he pulled out an envelope. She blinked. "Oh, I know," he said, laughing once. "That was cruel. What is it?" "An offer letter," he said. "From the city council. They want you to join the Health Equity Advisory Board." Her mouth fell open. "You're kidding. They saw the numbers from our first 6 months. They want your voice in the room." She stared at the envelope, stunned. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," he said. "You belong at that table." She turned the envelope in her hands, then glanced at him. "You didn't pull strings?" "No," he said. "They watched you work. That was enough." She nodded slowly. "Then I'll say yes." That night, they walked through a neighborhood where the city lights didn't drown out the stars, and he paused beneath a street lamp outside a closed bookstore. "I've been thinking," he said. "That usually means trouble." He reached into his coat again. This time, it wasn't an envelope. It was a box. She froze, breath-catching. He opened it. There was no crowd. No photographers. No flash. Just a ring. Simple. Elegant. A single diamond set in gold. "You once told me you didn't believe in fairy tales," he said, voice low. "And I told you I wasn't offering one. But I want to build something even better. A life that's real. That's ours. That keeps growing." Her eyes burned, but she didn't blink. "I want to wake up next to you when we're 70, he said. "I want to argue over which movie to watch and who forgot to buy soap. I want to fight with you and laugh with you and build with you. I want every version of this life with you at the center of it." She didn't speak for a long moment. Then she whispered yes. He slid the ring onto her finger, and she laughed through the tears that spilled fast and hot onto her cheeks. "I didn't think I'd ever have this," she said. "You didn't have to think it," he said. "You just had to let yourself deserve it." They didn't rush the wedding. They planned it together, slowly, between work and clinic meetings and long walks through the city. They chose a rooftop garden for the ceremony where ivy curled up trellises and lanterns swung gently from strings overhead. She wore a dress that wasn't white but a soft blush, the color of dawn. He wore a dark suit, no tie, his collar open just enough to break tradition. They stood beneath an arch of wildflowers, and when he took her hands, there was no hesitation in either of them. "I didn't grow up knowing what love looked like," she said. "But I know now. It looks like consistency, like sacrifice, like choosing each other, even when it's hard." He squeezed her fingers. "I used to think I had to build something so big it would matter. But you taught me that sometimes, the most important thing you build is a life with someone who sees you exactly as you are." Their vows were quiet. Their kiss was not. Afterward, they danced beneath the stars, their friends and family forming a circle around them. The music wasn't fancy. It was jazz, soft and slow, like the record he gave her that first winter. They didn't throw rice or light sparklers, but they laughed until their cheeks hurt. And when the night ended, they didn't leave in a limousine or a helicopter. They walked home, hand in hand, together. 2 years later, Greyson stood in the middle of a new clinic in the Bronx, the 6th to open under her leadership. A mural of children's faces stretched across the wall behind the waiting area, and a girl with a bandaged elbow smiled up from the intake desk. Brenner stood beside her, bouncing a squirming toddler on his hip, their daughter, Nora, who had inherited Greyson's eyes and his stubbornness. She's learned to climb the couch, he said, adjusting her with a wince. She's currently undefeated. Greyson laughed. Good. She's going to need that kind of ambition. They walked together through the halls, greeting staff, checking equipment, making sure everything was ready for the grand opening. Later, when the speeches were done and the crowd cleared out, she found him standing in the doorway of her new office, their daughter asleep against his chest. She stepped into his arms, kissed Nora's curls, then whispered against his neck, "This is the life I never knew I was allowed to want." He smiled, brushing her hair back. "You were always allowed, Greyson," he said. "You just had to believe you were worth it." And now she did. They didn't need a fairy tale. They had something better. They had each other.